This is TWiT.
Interesting note in Jean-Louis Gasset's Monday note. During Fireballs, John Gruber pulls it up. Gasset wrote that he had a hard time believing that the $29 battery replacement plan could have much of an impact on Apple's numbers. But
he obviously never went to an Apple resale store where they had those lineups for battery replacement.
Apparently,
those places were clogged like all year.
Mark Gurman at Bloomberg had private notes from an all-hands meeting on January 3rd. You know, those are, not public. But at that meeting, apparently, Tim Cook said Apple replaced 11 million batteries under the $29 replacement program.
I think Gurman had that they had a meeting, and Gruber had the number that they discussed.
Gruber has the number. Oh. Yeah. Oh, good on you, John.
Little birdies. Little birdies.
Little birdies. So that's about 10 million more, 9 or 10 million more than they would have normally done. Yeah. And so really what the question is just did fewer people upgrade to the newer iPhones because their old iPhone worked great? And purely anecdotally, I mentioned this before, my mom, I kept saying, come on, Mom, I'll give you a 10R. I've got one here. I'll give you a 10S Max, whatever you want. And she said, no, my beloved iPhone 6 is better than ever. I got the battery replacement.
I mean, if you go back to the 2018 Q1 conference call, Tony Sacconaghi asked Tim Cook if he was at all worried that the battery replacement would affect upgrades. And Tim said, it never entered our minds. That's the last thing we think about. We want to do what's best for our customer. And I have no idea. Ask me next year. So now, obviously,
well, yes,
next year has come. So.
And Gasset points out that regardless, they should have known about this. They must have known about this for months, not just the battery, but the drop in sales in China.
They didn't have new iPhones for months. Very few people, when you look at the iPhone release, it's like a blockbuster movie. It's not that, the same amount of people buy it in January, who buy it in February, who buy it in March. There's a huge spike in September or whatever the release month is, in October, November for some of the more recent phones. But it's a giant spike, and you don't see that really affecting it. But if people who got those battery replacements, 11 million people, if even a portion of those, by the time it got to September, said, you know what, exactly like your mom, this iPhone 6 is working great. Maybe I'll wait till next year to get a new iPhone. Then that spike is no longer quite so spiky.
But the Chinese economy has been slowing down for a while. It would have been foolish for them to assume they're going to have the same results in China. This was, as Gasset points out, and many others have, an S generation phone, and that's typically slower anyway.
Is that still a thing, do you think?
Oh, it's a thing. Of course it's a thing.
It's a moderated thing because some people wait for the S because they think it's going to be a better version of the phone.
Because this year I thought was a nice deviation from that, where it didn't feel like, hey, we took our top of the line flagship phone and made only an incremental adjustment to the processor and the storage. It felt like Apple was saying, the folks who really wanted an iPhone 10 last year but couldn't really stomach the price, we found a way to give you most of the features in slightly less build quality for a more affordable price. And to my mind, and at least to the people, what seems like the people I was talking to about this, that they almost saw it as a whole new product as opposed to like an S sort of thing.
You're talking about the 10R.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think the 10S is not significantly different than the 10.
But and
maybe we watch pretty closely. To the average consumer,
it's just the new phone.
It looks the same to me. I don't know if there was a lot of pressure if you had a 10 to go to the 10S. I gave my son my 10. He was very happy to have a 10.
It's hard to think, though, what they would. I mean, the 10 was so different. Like, immediately expecting a phone as different the next year, too.
No, you shouldn't. I'm not saying you should expect that. I'm just saying that that's typical of an S year, and that Apple should have known that the 10S wasn't going to be gangbusters compared to the 10 any more than the 6S was gangbusters to the 6.
They were pretty clear that it was they saw they expected this because they guided down heavily for this quarter. This quarter was already discounted more than I think a lot of people expected.
So what surprised them? What was the big surprise?
The amount of battery replacements affecting the upgrade cycle, but that was small. He said I think he said over 100%, which is a funny number until you actually dig into it. But over 100% was a rapid downturn in the Chinese market, far faster and more extreme than they expected.
And I think if you look at the notes that that Tim provided in his statement, the the issue here is the Chinese economy. It's not an iPhone problem. And when Apple first, when Tim first released those notes, people jumped on the iPhone problem. But if you look through all of the things that Apple was able to accomplish in the quarter, it becomes clear very quickly that if it wasn't for China and the economy deceleration, there would have been no need for Apple to do a guidance change. Now, their quarter still wouldn't have been as good as what they would have hoped, but there would be no need for this guidance change. So to say that that the iPhone is failing, or Apple has a huge iPhone problem, I think is a bit over dramatic at this stage. Yes, the upgrade cycles were affected by the battery replacements, and I'm not quite sure why Apple was so surprised with that, or at least as surprised as they seem to be. But that could also be, with a lot of users, it could be a comfort level. I've talked to a lot of people that are very weary of Face ID and not having a home button, and just different things. And if they have the chance to keep their phones by replacing a battery, then they're going to do that. And the economy, I think, of a lot of countries right now are kind of up in the air. The U.S.-Chinese battle and all of that kind of stuff. So it's affecting a lot of people in the economy in a lot of different ways. So if somebody has a chance for $29 to keep their current phone, I think they're going to do that. Now, an economic problem in a country as big as China is going to takes a while to go down. I mean, Apple rode that wave up, and right now they're riding that wave down. And right. they have no choice in the matter. It's an economic condition, but that will change again, and the economy will start to rise, and Apple will do that. And let's face it, if this economic problem came from Canada, Apple still wouldn't have had to warn, because the Chinese thing would have been good.
Jim,
if the economic problem was in Switzerland,
Liechtenstein,
or when they would not have to warn like they did now. This is
it's also interesting
an economic problem. It's not an iPhone problem.
It's also interesting to see now that we've heard from Samsung and we've heard from LG and we've heard from some of the Chinese manufacturers, and their results are in some cases not going to be any better. And I think in LG's case, way worse.
Right.
Yeah. And everything. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To be fair to the people that are saying that this is an iPhone problem, are there things that Apple should and could do to affect upgrades in the coming quarters? Absolutely. I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm just saying that the all the reporting saying that the iPhone is dead, I think they're wrong.
Oh yeah, that's a great headline. That's a great way to get people to click until they realize how many times they're clicking on that story today. But you make an excellent point. The $29 battery upgrade was a great deal, but even paying full price right now, $49 is not prohibitively expensive to perform an optional upgrade, or excuse me, an optional and available swap that can almost give new life to an old device. And maybe maybe one of the genies out of the bottle is people being aware that, wait a minute, all this time I could have just replaced a battery and been really happy with what I got. And I do think there are people who are wearying of that. They're starting to think of phones the same way they're thinking of their cars, where unless they're on a lease program, now it's like, no, this is the thing that I will keep using until it gets really, really weather beaten and broken and I can't use it anymore. In which case, that's when I shift it off to the kids, and that's when I finally get a new phone. Even this idea of getting a new phone every 2 years because a contract expired, I think is kind of dying. I do wonder if Tim is going to try to spin this at the next keynote by saying, and last quarter we sold over $1/3 billion in batteries. Applause, 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 applause. And please don't pay attention to this other graph.